And welcome to episode 8 of the Luckbox Podcast. This is a show where we talk all about eSports. And today we're joined by Michal, who is ESL's Vice President of Pro Gaming. Michal, thank you so much for taking part.
My pleasure.
Yeah. I saw you in London just, what was it, a couple of weeks ago, accepting, was it a Lifetime Achievement Award from eSports Insider?
eSports Insider Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame. It's essentially the same thing.
eSports Insider, because it's not all of eSports that thinks I'm a Hall of Famer. It's eSports Insider that thinks I'm a Hall of Famer. Big distinction.
Okay, but I would agree with that. I'm quite glad you haven't got the award with you though, do you? You're not. I
have it actually in the other room. By the way, everybody makes fun of this wallpaper. It's I rented this place for a year, so it's not staying.
No,
not my taste.
I would have had more respect if you just owned it and said, I like this wallpaper, I'm going with it. Well, we've been friends for a long time now. You're one of my oldest friends in esports, I think. And but for people who don't know you,
that means you haven't had friends for a really long time, because you're quite a number of years ahead of me.
Yeah, there's a few from Quake 1 days. Who I don't speak to as much. The thing is, in esports, a lot of people sort of come and go, not especially in the era we started in, right, when you couldn't make a career from it. So most people dipped their toe in, did a bit, but then left again and got a proper job. But just some mugs like us just stayed in it.
Yep.
Well, but I was just saying. Sorry,
everybody else got a real job when we were lazy.
Yeah, but here's the thing: like, there are many people who probably just know you as a guy who comes on the stage in Katowice and appears in the ESL videos. But who are you then? Can you introduce yourself, please?
So who am I? I'm a guy that got addicted to esports or competing online in FPS games around 2000, 2001.
That was Unreal Tournament, wasn't it?
Unreal Tournament, indeed, which was kind of in the food chain of esports at the time, quite below Quake and frowned upon by Quake players.
Yeah, I've forgiven you since, though, don't worry.
Then who else am I? I am a guy who spent a lot of time on the mat practicing judo. So when I went over to esports, when a lot of people simply didn't have, let's say, didn't know of certain things that sports have figured out over the years, such as seeding, how to do a bracket of this kind or that kind, whatever. I had that advantage that I was in judo as a referee and a coach and a competitor for a number of years. So I was able to bring in a lot of experience from that world over to esports. Other than that, just a regular guy, just a regular mess up, basically, who failed to finish a proper college. I have a bachelor's degree in English. It took me 6 years to complete it, where it normally should 3. Play video games, and I'm a sports fan, and now I have a family. Moved back to Poland after 9 years now of being abroad.
And you're in Poland now?
As you can see.
Well, I mean, that's not necessarily Poland. That wallpaper could be in any country.
Yeah, well.
But you're very modest about this. But one thing I remember about you from before the days this was an established industry is that you took everything very seriously. Even the philosophy of what makes an esport and what makes a good tournament, and what are the factors that teams need to be successful in esports.
Well, I don't know what to say to this other than I like when things are done right. If you're doing something, you're doing it for the right reasons, and ultimately it always comes back to the right reasons, right? You can cut a corner here or there, but you can't cut a corner every corner that you can possibly go into, around every bend, I suppose. And ultimately, you have to do the right thing at the end of the day. Otherwise, something will catch up to you. And it's been proven across the years in esports that this just happens time and again.
Okay. The thing that I think when I think of you these days is IEM. And I don't know if I'm wrong in thinking that. I mean, I don't know your entire history, but from what I understand, like basically you grew IEM from very humble roots to what it is today, which is a landmark series in esports. It is, the standard that people talk about when they want to put on a good event now. And how, I mean, how did it grow from these roots?
I think I don't think there's any single person in esports that had a massive influence on it. I don't think that's the thing. Most of the people that have, a long history and are credited and inducted into a Hall of Fame or whatever, we all pushed this cart together and we all rode the wave to some degree. And most of the credit that people like that I get, I think I actually rode the wave and managed not to get swallowed by it. So when we started with Intel Extreme Masters, it was in a corner of a trade show. Typically, we bought a 25 meter by 25 meter space for the tournament. There wasn't even a stage at some of those events at all. The players were there physically, but the commentators were actually in Cologne, in the studio in Cologne, connecting into the matches and broadcasting that out of the studio in Cologne. So the matches took place completely elsewhere, in places like a Comic Con or a CeBIT trade show. One of those we actually did at a shopping mall in Edmonton in Canada, on the floor of an ice skating rink, where we put up a bunch of wooden tiles on top of the ice and covered it with carpeting. And again, there wasn't even a stage. There were probably four big 50-inch screens that the audience would be watching it from. So it started off fairly modest, as you've put it, around 2006, and around probably 2013 we actually went to Poland, my home country, and we had probably one of the first events in the world, certainly in the West, in a venue of a 10,000 plus capacity, completely filled with esports, and the primary entertainment there was esports. An absolutely mind-blowing, phenomenal story, if I recount it, because I mean, today it sounds funny and trivial, but we went to see the venue, and we went to scout the venue, and we go into this cavernous.
This is the Spodek, I take it.
Yeah, this cavernous, huge hulk of a sports arena. And we look around and we think, damn it. I mean, the biggest stage we've done was probably 1,500 seats at CeBIT, where there was natural traffic for the trade show. So we couldn't even estimate what kind of traffic that show would attract on its own. So we sat down and we came up with this system where this was, by the way, at the time when you were, there's a saying in Poland that the bomb squad member only makes one mistake, right, ever. The implication being that the first mistake obviously is fatal. And this was kind of like this with us, if we tried something really, really big, esports wasn't as big and as well understood and established back then. We might have lost our sponsorships if we had a fiasco of a colossal scale. So
I suppose it wouldn't look good if you have this huge venue and it's just empty.
And I mean,
the atmosphere is not there.
Even though we could break our live audience size, right, in a venue of 12,500 capacity, 3,000 people doesn't really look that impressive. So somebody might actually go in and say, oh, you know what? This esports thing is interesting, but you know what? We'll put our money somewhere else. So being completely very, very petrified of the size of the venue, we sat down and thought, how do we maximize the chances to succeed? And we thought of a freemium model, kind of similar to most theme parks in America, where you buy a basic entrance ticket and you're in and you're doing whatever you like as much as you like. But if you want to skip all the queues for all the good rides, you buy the upgraded ticket. So we applied a similar model where everybody comes in completely for free, but they're being allowed, let's say at noon, whereas if you bought a ticket, you come through a separate entrance, you can come in and out through a separate entrance, and you come in at, let's say, 10 a.m. So 2 hours ahead of everyone, and you're able to get a seat. And we honestly didn't know what exactly to expect. So typically I go out on stage at events that kind of I feel more personally involved with, based on some kind of, let's call it connection.
Yeah.
So I went out 1 hour before my speech was supposed to start. I look over, at what's going on from the stage, and there was this, I still remember until this day, there was this murmur that it's kind of like that. I don't know how to, I lack the vocabulary in English to properly describe it, but there was, you could clearly see going from behind the stage, there was this hush, this murmur of literally thousands of sources, and it all kind of blended into this already atmosphere of anticipation and waiting, and you can sense that something big and magical would transpire. And I go onto the stage, I have a look around, I scan the place, and it's completely and utterly packed, right? All the way to people sitting on the staircases and things like that. There was not a free seat in the house, and it was entirely shocking and mind-blowing. It really was. And then it was, that typical Polish winter with snow and -4 degrees Celsius and things like that.
It gets so cold.
And there were maybe, I don't know, 2,000 people in the queue waiting outside.
So Katowice, that came out of nowhere. It really
true.
did feel like that. How did that even happen?
I tell this story in every interview. Apparently, it's, people don't really read interviews with me anymore, but for whatever reason, I happened to give an interview to the online edition of Forbes.com about Intel Extreme Masters, and completely randomly, a councilman from the city of Katowice happened to read the interview, become interested in it as an opportunity for his city, because Katowice is a city that's it grew prosperous around coal mining and all these industries that grew around it. But coal mining is obviously not a growing industry anymore, and is kind of dying off. And the city in general was only known for coal mining and Spodek, even though there's plenty of people, around 2 million people living in and around Katowice in general, in that municipal just cluster of cities that are connected together. Katowice quite badly needed a let's call it a rebrand, a refresh of what they stand for, and they wanted to change into a city of youth and technology, and it quite fit into that theme in general. Intel Extreme Masters did. So the guy looked me up on Facebook. Turns out we have friends in common, because Poland obviously isn't as big as one might imagine. 40 million people. 40 million people. We have 40 million people, and we have friends in common, him and I. So he chatted me up, and I have to say it really helped, because every now and then I would get random things like, oh, I have this great idea for I don't know, I produce dice, and do you need dice? Because I produce dice for games, right? And random spam messages like that when entrepreneurs would go out and look for an opportunity with esports. But this guy seems like he knew one of my friends. I asked one of my friends, "Hey, what is this guy? Who is this guy?" Looked him up, Googled him, turned out legitimate. So I set up a meeting between him and ESL Poland, and the guy from ESL Poland obviously is a very, very good ESL employee, I'd say. By the way, he's now the COO of the company. So he basically took that story then and fast forwarded to a point where him and me and a couple of guys from Intel were meeting with the city president to discuss how exactly we're going to do this thing. And the rest of the history, it's, so many glorious stories, so many fantastic moments for everybody across the board. The gamers, the press, the fans, the politicians of the city. I mean, they meet people from China and they go, "Oh, we're from Katowice," and they go, "Oh, Katowice eSports." And I'm not even making this up. It's. I wish I did. I wish I.
Well, no,
I
I mean
wish I was, but
that is, it is a beautiful story, and you've also secured the major for the next IEM. How do you feel?
Yeah, we're quite proud of that. Katowice has had 2 majors actually. It's actually a friend of mine mentioned to me that if you really think about it, Katowice is the birthplace of modern Counter-Strike, because the first major, the very first major, was held by DreamHack, and it was in a smaller space, in a space typical of DreamHack Winter, which, by the way, are always very good at events, and year on year they've always retained a level of prestige. But Katowice was the first event that really took Counter-Strike Global Offensive to that scale where people go, holy shit, kind of like that. We had the fortune, the good bracket fortune, as the tournament organizers always say, of Virtus.pro playing Ninjas in Pajamas in the grand final, and 10,000 throats screaming Virtus.pro is just, until this day, gives me shivers, because that was just something. I'm not sure anybody had ever experienced anything like this before that final, because we've had a final before that for League of Legends, and it was really, really good. But the unity of the crowd behind Virtus.pro, and how they felt like one organism. It was just probably an amazing experience to be inside, most likely even as an NIP player, because I mean, there were the first players in all of Counter-Strike history that played in front of such a crowd in such an atmosphere, and whether it is with or against the crowd, obviously makes a difference. But in a few ways, after so many events having happened, probably losing in front of such a gigantic crowd is better than winning in front of 500 people.
No, I know what you mean. I've obviously been to hundreds and hundreds of esports events. Before that time, people would be at these events, be very interested and engaged in the content, but you didn't really identify that everyone was cheering for a team or cheering for that team. Every event was significant, but having that partisan crowd changed the game a little bit, because now we're talking about people who are huge fans and they're happy when a team wins and they're crying when their team loses. And I don't think that really existed before this era of esports.
Yeah, and it's changing, and I keep seeing new things that I never thought would exist in esports. Just an example, I randomly chanced to meet some Dutch people on my trip to Liverpool one day. Sorry, not Dutch, Danish people. And I stayed in touch, and I invited one of them over to Katowice. And I gave him a backstage tour with his son. His son was, I think, 11 or 12 at the time. Big Astralis fan, wearing an Astralis jersey very, very proudly. So, we're sitting there and talking in the tournament area. I'm kind of explaining. I sat down the kid in, the seat where a competitor would normally play. And I see out of the corner of my eye, Kirby goes by, the former Astralis player that went to North. And I see the kid perking up like this, looks at him, they make eye contact, and the kid goes, he shows his Astralis jersey, goes, like, you traitor, And it's the very first time ever that I've seen an 11-year-old diss a professional gamer for betraying his favorite team. That was a new one, and I keep getting those new experiences in esports, not just in Katowice, but just all across the esports world. It just reminds me that we've gone a really long way, but we've still got a really long way to go as well.
Yeah. Speaking of Katowice, a question that we were asked as well was about these physical hubs of esports, because Katowice has become a hub of esports now. It's known around the world for it. In a similar vein, ESL has put Cologne on the map for esports, particularly ESL 1 Cologne, and there are other places that are similar to that. Are these physical hubs important, do you think, in the growth of esports, or are we an internet generation that plays online, consumes entertainment online? Is there a need for physical hubs for our new industry?
Yes and no. Certainly to a lesser degree than anywhere else, because it's easier than ever before in the history of mankind to communicate with other people and to move around, to take your ass from London to New York, or from London to Tokyo, or wherever. And if I really wanted to at this stage, I could have a season ticket whilst living in Poland. I can have a season ticket for Liverpool and attend every home game if I really wanted to. And it's not, outside of probably it affecting my relationship to my wife quite negatively, it's actually very doable, where 20, 30 years ago, it still would have been probably unthinkable. So geography is less and less relevant in our world. I've actually read an article in the British press that people in Great Britain, increasingly so, are beginning to be fans of teams that are unrelated to where they live geographically. Simply because of, or if your city doesn't happen to have a Premier League team, people from such cities would typically support their hometown. Let's say you're from Sheffield, you're either a Wednesday or a United fan, and then you're going to be a fan of a Premier League team, or maybe an international team, even like Barcelona, Real Madrid. And that's an increasingly growing trend, simply because the coverage, the access to that coverage, to that content is so easy these days. And it's the same thing with esports. And it's the same thing with esports also, because you log on in your slippers to your PC and you play people from 50 different nations in the space of a day. So geography is less important to people like us and younger.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think there are certain experiences where, at the end of the day, we can't escape the fact that the world is still physical. We can't trade wearing VR goggles for the actual sound of Spodek or a Lanxess Arena in Cologne, where over 10,000 people are making noise and getting crazy for the same thing you're getting crazy for. So as long as that is not replaced, we will not replace physical churches of esports, to use a little bit of pathos. in my
Another thing that's important, ESL has its ups and downs, but it's still considered the favorite for players in Counter-Strike still. And as one of the biggest, well, the biggest esports organization in the world, that's a tricky thing to achieve because you tend to get a lot of vitriol pointed in your direction. So how has ESL managed to maintain this reputation of being a really great tournament organizer, particularly for CS:GO?
I think overall, I think our reputation differs based on which group you ask within which gaming community. So for right now, I would say, and right now I would say we are quite hated still, or let's say disliked in Dota.
Yeah.
Judging by the some of the reactions that I read on Reddit, still after probably 9 months since an event that occurred. I think there are still people that remember. In Counter-Strike, there are still people that harp on to certain stories that were that certain people made them, let's say, the most out of, because it's kind of like this in our world in general, that now every story gets maximized and kind of blown up to the maximum degree, because it's the polarizing things that actually attract a lot of attention. And if somebody lives off of attention, it's in their best interest to maximize that around themselves. And sometimes we've been criticized fairly. Sometimes somebody took advantage of the fact that you can blow up an issue that's polarizing, or say, well, let's make a 45-minute thing about what if ESL was evil and what would that mean, and that leaves a very lasting impression with people. But that period in general, where I'd say we did have certain choices which we probably wouldn't have made if we could come back and have a go at it again. That's really taught us to be more careful, to be more considerate of every angle, every position. And we've really decided to, and this is mostly the people in Cologne actually, that are behind that rise of ESL as a, let's say, favorite tournament organizer. We've decided to do everything we can in order to up-level the quality of what we deliver. It was very much a wake-up signal to go and do better. So today, for example, just one of the things that we do is, anytime we have an event, we do our very best to make sure that per every team there is a hotel room where the bed is taken out, everything is taken out, and there's just 5 PCs in there, and the players can practice anytime they like, and not in a space where somebody can spy on them potentially, but in the highest degree of privacy that we can ever guarantee. So that's one thing. Another thing, for example, is whenever Intel is our global technical partner, that means that every tournament PC that we ever use has an Intel processor. We have a process with the PCs where, let's assume for a second that tomorrow Intel releases a new PC, a new CPU, and obviously we want to promote that, not the previous generation of the technology. So what we would do is Intel would build a full set of PCs with a new configuration, and that would go to Intel Extreme Masters Chicago, which is the new event, and that would be put in the practice rooms for all the players, whereas we would still play on the old generation in the tournament. So those new PCs would be tested in practice by obviously the most demanding crowd that there is, and then we'll get feedback from them, and either it's great and it's usually great, or they would say, you know what, something's off, and then you would fix it. By the way, I skipped a step. Those PCs get actually sent to Cologne, to our offices, where they are tested rigorously there, including our audio solution that happens on stage, including the headsets and everything. Because in the past it has happened that our audio solution required more power than the sound output would give, for example, and that created bugs. And the audio solution we had on stage was buggy. So we practically simulate the stage environment, same kind of network, same kind of audio solution, everything. Then those PCs go to, let's say, Intellectual Masters Chicago to be tested. And after they're tested and the test was a success with the pro gamers, then we use those PCs at the next event after that. So even there, we've eliminated the maximum possible amount of risk in those PCs. And obviously, it helps to have a sponsor who produces the latest and greatest in gaming technology and provides us with the latest equipment. I've seen plenty of tweets from pro gamers saying these are good PCs, but IEM has the best, for example, ESL1 has the best. And it's really, really, I mean, I've read a lot of stuff over my 9 years with ESL online, both good and bad. But it's very, very fun to read tweets from pro gamers praising ESL, saying this was a fantastic experience. And nothing's a better compliment these days to me if I talk to especially young CS players that don't remember how it used to be or never experienced how it used to be in esports. They go, they lose, and even though they've lost a really very, very important match, they shake your hand and say, thanks very much, that was a very good event. Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
and they have no further comment outside of that. It's it's a big pleasure to experience that, and the guys in Cologne, over in Cologne, are mostly should take the credit for it.
Okay, yeah, because for context, it didn't always used to be as smooth as this. We had PC crashes all the time in tournaments in the early days, and things going down, into network being bad, and so on.
DDoS attacks and other things.
But here's the thing: is that every so often, there were, in the major recently, the Face It major, there was some technical issues, and as much as, like I say, I think people love to hate ESL sometimes, but there were times when they were saying, "Oh, well, ESL wouldn't have done this."
What I think part of it with us is also confirmation bias, because we actually run I think around 10 to 13 stadium events that get a lot of attention. And even if we have the same failure rate, let's assume for a second, purely hypothetically, we have the same failure rate as anybody else in the industry, no single organizer statistically is more likely than us to make the largest number of mistakes per year, simply because we do more than others. So we've had to work really, really hard in order to decrease our likelihood way below the industry standards, so it doesn't happen as frequently to us as it would to somebody else.
Okay, well, that makes sense. I feel like we shouldn't delve any more deeply into that. Something else I wanted to talk to you about, because we've had lots of conversations about esports games and what makes a good esports game. And one thing we can say for sure is that Counter-Strike has persevered over the years. From very early days of being just a popular online game, becoming the leading game from things like Quake, And in all that time, and we're talking 20 years now, it's still there as one of, if not the top esports game. What is it about Counter-Strike? Is it the perfect game? Is it the way it's been managed? How has it done this? Because we always talk about esports, about how the game always changes, but Counter-Strike's been there. It seems like forever.
I think Counter-Strike is a blend of very, very good features. It's relatively easy to pick up. If you have a basic FPS skill set, it's relatively easy to pick up. A lot of the depth in it is actually, or what it requires is teamwork, basic teamwork. And if you grow up in a society, you have basic teamworking skills because society forces you to learn to cooperate with other people, as opposed to playing one-on-one where it's just, it's just pure skill. Here's communication where everybody has a basic skill set to play and kind of enjoy that experience. That would be my guess. It's not too quick to be overwhelming when it comes to communication as well. It creates a fantastic pace of peaks and valleys for audiences to enjoy. It forces action. It creates points where there's a bomb and it's very clear you have to go and defuse it, and you only have so many seconds to do so, and so on and so forth. So it's a blend of a lot of really, really really good features, and it's easy to watch as well. I can't say that I've played Counter-Strike a lot in my life, but I've certainly watched more than the average person has ever played Counter-Strike, because it's that type of game. It's very entertaining, and it's also the team dynamic that I think influences things. Transfers and how certain groups gel, how other groups don't, how certain super teams are supposed to really dominate and they play completely averagely below. There's together they're smaller than the sum of their parts. It's just, I think it's not a perfect esport, but of all the esports out there, I think it's probably the closest to it.
Okay. But then we're seeing new games. We've got Call of Duty Black Ops 4 being released. Is there? I'm sure they're all wanting to take over in some respect from Counter-Strike. What's? Do you think that would happen? Is there going to be a new title taking the crown?
I think by now, I think it would take an era of catastrophic proportions from the people making, or let's say the custodians of Counter-Strike, which is Valve. I think they would have to make an era of catastrophic proportions in order to mess up and completely lose and allow another game to take over. And I have to say, as much as they get hate on social media from certain fans, I have nothing but admiration for Valve, because in my up until Counter-Strike Global Offensive, I had never ever seen a game being rated so poorly by pro gamers and make a comeback from that state.
Yeah,
they've done something which until that point I thought was impossible, which is iterate the game and fix it and put it not only on its feet but turn it into the wild runaway success that it is.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us, Michal. We're going to wrap up on that. So this is the Luckbox Podcast. We're on YouTube, and if you're already on YouTube, you can listen to the audio-only version on Soundcloud and Spotify. And we'll see you next time.